Welcome to this deep dive, where we're going way beyond just the headlines and getting into some fascinating firsthand accounts of how teachers in Japan are reacting to those Reiwa-era education reforms.
You bet. It's pretty amazing,
Sure.
actually.
And you've shared some incredible notes with me from this teacher group nicknamed Yoko Yoko, and it spans an entire year, April 2024 to March 2025 of their meetings.
That's right. Yeah.
And honestly, I'm already hooked. Like, this is not your typical professional development kind of thing.
Right. No, exactly.
It's really fascinating.
It's like we get this peek behind the curtain and we see how these teachers are actually struggling with these new ideas and how they're trying to implement them and make them actually work for their students in the classroom.
Right. And, it's inspiring to me just to see this level of dedication and collaboration, in a profession that can often feel really isolating.
Yeah.
So to get us started, what exactly is Yokyoko? Is this like a formal organization, or is it more of a grassroots kind of movement?
Well, I think it's a very informal network of teachers, mostly English teachers, but it seems like there are some teachers from other subjects who join as well. And they just get together regularly to share their experiences and help each other navigate the ever-changing world of education.
Now, skimming through these meeting notes, are there any recurring themes or big ideas that really jump out at you?
Definitely. One thing that really struck me is how much they're emphasizing student engagement.
Yeah.
I mean, they are constantly talking about ways to make learning fun and relevant, which, especially with teenagers is a challenge.
That's the $1 million question right there.
Yeah.
It's one thing to come up with a great lesson plan, but if you can't keep the students engaged,
Right.
it's not going to work. So
Exactly.
it sounds like Yokyoko is really trying to bridge that gap between theory and practice.
They are, and they're doing it in some pretty creative ways. I mean, I see them talking about using games, real-life scenarios. They're even bringing elements of Japanese pop culture into their lessons.
Oh, that's smart.
Yeah.
It reminds me of that study about how incorporating humor can actually improve retention and recall.
Yeah.
So you can make the students laugh. They're more likely to remember what you taught.
Absolutely.
So it seems like they're also putting a lot of emphasis on this backward design thing, which, is all the rage in education circles these days.
Right. It's that whole idea of starting with the desired outcome. Like, what do you want students to actually be able to do? And then working backward to create the curriculum from that point.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. It can be a really powerful approach.
Yeah.
But I'm really curious to see how they actually apply it in their classrooms.
So what are some of the details we're getting about how they're implementing this?
Well, one thing that stands out is how much they're using visual aids like mind maps and tree diagrams to break down those big learning goals into smaller, more manageable steps.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
It's almost like they're creating a roadmap for their students so they can see exactly where they're going and how each lesson fits into the bigger picture.
Right. Exactly.
And, it's not just about the content itself.
Yeah.
It seems like they're also talking a lot about creating this positive and supportive learning environment where students feel comfortable taking risks and making mistakes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is so important, especially, in a subject like English, where students might feel really self-conscious about their speaking skills.
Absolutely.
And it seems like a lot of their ideas are influenced by this Professor Nakahima, who's mentioned quite a bit in these notes. Have you heard of him?
Yeah, I mean, he's a bit of a legend. In Japanese education circles, he's got this really interesting philosophy about education being the completion of personality, which I think resonates deeply with the Yokoyoko teachers.
Yeah, and so it sounds like he's advocating for a more holistic approach to education, where it's not just about acquiring knowledge, but also about, developing character and fostering this love of learning.
Exactly, yeah. And I think that philosophy is really evident in the way that these teachers approach their work. I mean, they're not just trying to get their students to pass a test. They're trying to help them become well-rounded individuals who are prepared for success in life.
Okay, I'm already impressed, and we haven't even gotten to the specific meetings yet.
I know, right?
So let's dive into those, starting with their first gathering in April 2024. What's on the agenda for this kickoff meeting?
Well, it seems like they're setting some pretty ambitious goals for the year. They're talking about implementing these new Reiwa-era lesson plans, which are supposed to be more interactive and engaging, and they're also putting a lot of emphasis on supporting newer teachers.
Well, that makes sense. With any major educational shift like this, there's going to be a lot of support and guidance needed, especially for teachers who are just starting out.
Yeah.
So what details are we getting about these new lesson plans, I mean, are they radically different from the old ones?
Well, from what I can gather, Reiwa-era lesson plans are a lot less about rote memorization and a lot more about active learning and critical thinking.
Okay.
They're designed to encourage students to participate more in class, to ask questions, and to really engage with the material.
So it's a much more student-centered approach then.
Exactly.
Yeah, that sounds like a really positive shift.
Yeah.
But I imagine it also requires a totally different approach from the teachers.
Oh, absolutely.
It's not just about standing at the front of the classroom and lecturing anymore.
Right.
So how are they handling that transition?
Well, they're talking about the need for professional development, peer-to-peer mentoring, and just creating a culture of collaboration where teachers can learn from each other and share best practices.
I love that.
Yeah.
It sounds like they're really creating this community of practice.
Yeah.
Where everyone is supporting each other and they're learning together. And that can be so powerful, especially in a profession that can sometimes feel really isolating. And it's not just about the practical aspects of teaching either. It seems like there's also a lot of discussion about, like the emotional side of things, creating this positive and supportive classroom environment where students feel comfortable taking risks and making mistakes.
Absolutely.
If students are afraid to make mistakes, they're never going to want to participate.
Yeah.
And they're not going to really engage with the material.
Right.
So it sounds like Yoko Yoko is really trying to foster this growth mindset
Totally.
among their students.
And among themselves.
And among themselves.
Yeah. There's this great quote from Professor Yokomizo, who is this really experienced educator. He tells the group, mistakes are not failures, they're opportunities for learning.
I love that. I need to write that down.
Me too.
That's such a great perspective. It takes the pressure off, and it just encourages a more experimental approach to teaching. And that seems to be the overarching theme of this first meeting, is embracing change, supporting each other, and creating a more dynamic and engaging learning experience for their students.
Yeah, I think that's a great summary of that first meeting.
So it sounds like a fantastic start to the year. Now what about the next meeting? What new challenges and insights do they uncover as they actually start to put these ideas into practice? So we're moving on to their May meeting, and I'm noticing from your notes, it seems like maybe the honeymoon phase of all these ambitious plans is starting to wear off just a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit. I think, the initial enthusiasm is still there.
Sure.
But you start to see them bumping up against some of those real-world challenges. They're talking about how hard it is to get buy-in from all the teachers, and they're dealing with limited resources.
Oh, yeah.
And, of course, the eternal struggle of how do you keep teenagers engaged?
Right.
Which is,
That never goes away.
never goes away.
It's funny how these universal teacher challenges just seem to transcend all cultural boundaries.
Oh, total.
It doesn't matter where you are in the world. Motivating teenagers is its own special art form.
It really is. It really is.
So I'm curious, what specific strategies are they brainstorming to tackle these issues?
Well, one thing they're really grappling with is how to implement those Reiwa-era lesson plans.
Yeah.
But in a way that feels authentic and not just like they're, checking boxes.
Yeah, right.
Right? Because it's so easy to just kind of go through the motions,
Yeah.
especially when you have this whole new curriculum that you're trying to implement.
Right.
So it sounds like they're really trying to find ways to make these lessons meaningful for themselves and for their students.
Yeah, they're not afraid to think outside the box and get a little creative.
No, they're not. And there's this whole discussion about how to incorporate more these moments of change into their lessons to keep students on their toes.
Ah, yes, 10. It's like that little jolt of energy or that unexpected twist that just kind of brings the students back in when their attention starts to drift.
Exactly, yeah.
So do they give any specific examples of how they're actually using 10 in their classrooms?
Yeah, one teacher talks about using surprise quizzes.
Okay.
Another one mentions bringing in guest speakers. Someone else describes switching up the seating arrangement mid-lesson to kind of shake things up.
Oh, fun.
It's all about finding ways to keep students guessing and prevent them from zoning out.
Those are some great ideas, and it sounds like they're also thinking carefully about how to better integrate the native English speakers into their lessons.
Yes, definitely. There's a lot of discussion about moving away from that traditional model where the NES just comes in for a separate activity,
Right.
and towards a more collaborative approach where the NES and the Japanese teacher are working together much more closely.
So it's much more integrated then.
Much more integrated.
Okay, yeah, that's a really interesting shift.
Yeah.
It seems like they're recognizing that the NES can bring so much more to the table than just pronunciation practice.
Right, exactly.
They can share their cultural insights and their real-world experiences with the language, and even help to create a more authentic and engaging learning environment.
Yeah.
So are they giving any specific examples of how they're actually doing this?
They are. They're talking about having the NES co-teach lessons, lead discussions on cultural topics, and even participate in those 10 moments of change to keep students engaged.
It sounds like they're really kind of pushing the boundaries of what's possible in the EFL classroom.
They really are, and they're doing it in a way that feels very collaborative and supportive.
Yeah.
You know, there's no sense of competition or hierarchy between the Japanese teachers and the NES. It seems like they genuinely value each other's perspectives and expertise.
Which is so important when teachers feel respected and supported.
Absolutely.
It creates a much more positive learning environment for everyone.
Absolutely.
Now, I can't help but notice that this whole technology issue keeps popping up in these meeting notes.
Yeah.
It seems like they're having some pretty lively debates about the role of Google Translate and these other AI tools in language learning.
It's a hot topic.
It's definitely a hot topic.
Yeah, and you know, on the one hand, they recognize that these tools can be incredibly useful for students, especially for things like looking up vocabulary or getting the gist of a text.
Right.
But on the other hand, they're worried about the potential downsides of students relying too heavily on technology.
It's like that classic dilemma, is it a tool or a crutch?
That's exactly it, yeah.
Yeah.
I think the Yoko Yoko teachers are trying to find that sweet spot where technology can enhance learning without undermining, you know, the core principles of language acquisition.
Right, so they're advocating for kind of this balanced approach.
Right, a balanced approach.
Where students are encouraged to use technology strategically, but also to develop their own skills and their own understanding of the language.
Exactly.
And it seems like they're not shying away from the ethical considerations either.
No, not at all.
You know, they're having some really thoughtful discussions about the potential biases embedded in AI translation tools and the importance of teaching students to be critical consumers of information.
Absolutely.
Wow. They are really grappling with some complex issues here.
They really are, and they're doing it in a way that's both intellectually stimulating but also grounded in the realities of the classroom.
Right.
You know, they're not just talking about abstract concepts, they're sharing their own experiences, their successes, their failures, and they're learning from each other along the way.
You know, it's really making me rethink my own approach to technology in the classroom.
Yeah.
I'm starting to see the potential for using these AI tools in a more mindful and purposeful way.
I think that's the beauty of Yoko Yoko. It's
Yeah.
not about providing all the answers.
Right.
It's about sparking a dialogue and challenging assumptions and inspiring teachers to think differently about their practice.
It sounds like they've created a truly unique and valuable professional learning community.
I think so, yeah.
Now let's move on to their June meeting.
Okay.
And from your notes, it looks like they're diving deeper into some specific teaching strategy and sharing some personal anecdotes from their classrooms.
Yeah, yeah.
So what's capturing their attention this time?
So in June, they seem to move away from the broader philosophical discussions and get into the actual nitty-gritty of lesson planning. And there's this really fascinating conversation about these individualized workbooks that they're using.
Okay, I'm really intrigued by this idea. I can see how workbooks would be great for letting students work at their own pace, especially with something like, you know, grammar practice.
Right. And it's not just about the pace. It's about how these workbooks can help students track their progress.
Yeah.
Which seems to be a huge motivator for them.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so much more rewarding to actually see how far you've come rather than just, you know, feeling lost in a sea of exercises.
Right, exactly. And it ties back to that whole theme of personalization that we've been seeing throughout these meetings. I mean, they're even talking about how they're using different types of workbooks for students who are visual learners versus students who prefer more kinesthetic activities.
Wow, so they're really taking differentiated instruction to a whole new level here.
They really are.
It's impressive.
They're also talking about using more video recording in their lessons.
Yeah.
And not just for like watching movies or things like that, but for students to actually record themselves speaking.
Oh, that's brilliant.
Yeah.
You know, I remember when I was first learning English, I was terrified to speak out loud.
Yeah.
But being able to see myself on video actually helped me pinpoint the areas where I really needed to improve.
Right. It takes away that fear of being judged because you can analyze your own mistakes in private.
Right.
And then you can practice without the pressure of having an audience.
Exactly. Exactly. And the teachers are noticing that it really seems to boost students' confidence.
Yeah.
One of them mentions how Even the shy students were really eager to watch their own progress.
It's amazing what a little bit of technology can do when it's used in these really thoughtful ways.
It really is. And speaking of technology, they circle back to that whole AI discussion, this time with a focus on Google Translate. And it sounds like the debate gets pretty nuanced.
Yeah, I mean, they're acknowledging the usefulness of it,
Sure.
but they're also warning against becoming over-reliant on it.
Right.
One teacher even brings up this idea of translation literacy, teaching students how to use these tools critically.
So not just, blindly trusting whatever Google spits out.
Right.
But actually understanding its limitations.
Exactly, and being aware of potential biases, especially when it comes to, cultural nuances or idiomatic expressions.
So that's kind of like teaching them to be savvy researchers.
Yes.
Even in the digital realm.
Exactly, yeah.
Now, one thing that really caught my eye was this story about Teacher Tokyo and the graduation ceremony.
Oh, yeah.
Now, it's not a Yoko meeting.
Right.
But it just seemed to embody their spirit so perfectly.
It really did. It was like seeing their philosophy in action, but outside the classroom.
Yeah.
So he basically turned this graduation ceremony into this massive collaborative project. He involved the students and other teachers and everything from like writing the speeches to creating the artwork for the ceremony.
So it's taking that sense of ownership to a whole new level.
It really is. It's no longer just about the school doing something for the students.
Right.
It's about everyone being a part of it.
And can you imagine that sense of pride and accomplishment?
Oh, it must have been incredible.
It's such a powerful example of how this shared vision can really bring an entire community together.
And it's not just about, one event.
Right.
It's about fostering a different kind of learning environment overall.
Exactly.
Where everyone feels valued and everyone has a voice.
Yeah. You know what really stuck with me about that story was that these ideas aren't just for language learning. They're really about fostering this completely different kind of learning environment.
Right. Absolutely.
So we've covered a whole year of Yoko meetings here.
We have.
From that initial excitement of the new reforms to some of those real-world challenges that they're grappling with, what's the overall feeling that you're left with?
Honestly, just really impressed. I mean, these Yoko teachers are clearly dedicated, they're reflective, and they're willing to try new things even when things get tough.
And it's so inspiring to see that level of passion.
Yeah.
Especially with all the challenges that educators are facing today.
Yeah, for sure.
But you can tell that they haven't lost sight of what really matters, and that's the students.
That's right.
And they're doing it all together. They're supporting each other, they're sharing ideas, and they never stop asking that question. How can we do better?
Yeah, exactly.
So for our listeners who might be thinking, okay, this is all great, but what does it mean for me? What's the one big takeaway that we can leave them with?
I think it's this. Learning, whether you're a teacher or a student, it's a journey, not a destination. And it's a journey that's best taken with others in an environment that encourages curiosity, experimentation, and yes, even a bit of fun along the way.
Beautifully said. And if this deep dive sparks some ideas for you, we would love to hear them. So share your thoughts, your aha moments, even your struggles with us on our website or social media. Let's keep this conversation going. And until next time, keep those minds engaged and never be afraid to dive deep.